through this panel. First, we'll go with the introductions. Hi, my name is Ki-Seok Chun. I lead digital advisor services at STV. I'll be moderating the panel for the session today. And just a little bit about myself and the company. STV, I believe we're a engineering consulting company. We've been around for 120 years. And part of our efforts to stand a digital components, we've standed a digital advice services about 3 years ago. And our focus is really around making sure that we're supporting our clients with implementing digital ecosystems from planning to design to construction to operations. And part of our effort, because AI and ML is really big topic of the day, and we're starting with the first session. Hopefully we'll cover a lot of interesting contents here today. Please, Ty and Mark, if you could just introduce yourself with your bit of your background, so that way our audience can understand your lens when it comes down to AI ML discussions, please.
Sure. Thanks, Ki-Seok. I'm Mark McRoy. I'm the Director of Analytics at STV. I'm part of the Digital Advisory Group. And as Ki-Seok mentioned, it's a national practice of technology experts that were there to support the business lines and what they do. Analytics is encompassing of all data and how we are looking at data across the construction industry. So we have data analysts on staff, building dashboards and reports. We have data scientists on staff, building our machine learning models and AI, and we have GIS folks on staff as well. So we're doing the mapping and geospatial data science components as well. I've been in the technology realm for over 20 years, doing software development and leading teams across the AEC industry for the last 12 years. So yeah, happy to be here.
And I'm Ty Warner. I am not with STV, but I have an appreciation for them. And thank you for your sponsorship. So I am Executive Director of the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. We are the metropolitan planning organization for Northwest Indiana. So if you're not from here, Indiana is just right over across the state line here, right around the corner. As our tagline says for the South Shore Commuter Line, right around the corner on the South Shore Line. We are, as the MPO, the distributor of federal transportation funds. So we are a public entity. If you're familiar with Chicago, we're CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, but across the state line in Indiana. Just want to comment on our two panelists. It may be instructive for this discussion, actually, it's sort of the human component and the machine component. One of them came down with COVID, and the other one's car broke down. So they are taking Uber, so they may get here like 8:15, and then so if you see somebody joining the panel, you may have this moment of relief of thank goodness we have somebody else to listen to. So that's what's going on this morning. Oh, as far as AI goes, so as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, we, as I said, we distribute federal transportation funds and we do regional planning for Northwest Indiana. So we do have very practical components of doing things like, for example, traffic counts. And we have started to make the change from the old tube system of just literally measuring who goes over those tubes to using camera systems that start analyzing, is it a bicycle, is it a car, is it a truck, that sort of thing, and making analytical assessments on the capacity of our roadways and what's needed as we plan for the future. Much more I could say, but there's a start for an intro.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you. So very first question for the session. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your current role and how AI ML has been impacting your role, as well as some of the trends that you're seeing in the AI ML space related back to your current roles?
Sure. So I will say that AI ML has been the talk of the town recently. So a year ago, maybe a few people may have mentioned it using ChatGPT to do their homework or something like that. But recently we've seen it expand exponentially across all sectors of the industry. So in the transportation industry, using AI on top of camera systems, to track vehicles and pedestrian movement, analyze crash data or test. So analyzing camera footage from transportation agencies to analyze near miss data, crash data, pedestrians not using the crosswalk, if there's certain safety issues, and using AI to monitor that in real time to report back incidents, or collecting all that information to make informed decisions about how to improve safety. From a construction standpoint, using AI for like predictive analytics for asset management. So understanding the life cycle of an asset, and when someone inspects that asset, those key parameters inform them to how long that asset is going to last in the future, what's the risk of that failing, and identifying when to repair or replace that asset in the future. And this really helps with budgeting and everything like that. And I've seen the conversations just every day. I'm getting emails from people wanting to utilize AI and machine learning. So it's really a change quickly.
So I'm coming a little bit more from the planning perspective, and that maybe not to make too sharp a divide, but Mark's a bit on more of the practitioner side, and I'm a little bit, I don't know if you've heard this whole line about planners and engineers and how difficult they can be to work together. So I don't know if you've heard this line before, but planners eventually keep learning less and less about more and more until they eventually know nothing about everything. And engineers learn more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. So there you go. So there's a lot happening in the planning field that you may already be aware of that is trying to take more advantage of AI. I mentioned about traffic counting, as Mark spoke of as well, and trying to assess traffic movements. I know Tesla just released a video recently talking about the advantages of full self-driving mode versus human reaction. And I'm going to come back to that and talk about that because I think there's a point to be learned from this. But besides the AV component and autonomous vehicle component, there's a lot more happening in the way of public engagement. Just as you know, if you've been involved in any project, which I'm sure most of you have, that has had a public input requirement, particularly if it's very hot and heated and large scale, there can be a lot of opinions about that sort of thing. So AI is being used to help synthesize that input and being able to take all that data from people's responses, even if it's just textual responses or transcribed responses, and is able to analyze that data and be able to make an assessment of where's sort of the feel on this? What are some well, you've all used, I'm sure by this point, AI, where it's summarized sort of the meat and potatoes of, like I know Adobe does this now, and others where it's summarizing the gist of the long articles. You can kind of get the information up front. Same thing with public engagement, so that's working. There's a lot of boundary analysis between zoning districts and census blocks and trying to correlate those different boundaries and trying to make some assessments about what that teaches us about demographics and land use changes. That's happening as well. I think it's instructive that the American Planning Association, they've started this foresight series where every year they issue a report about future trends. And in the latest one, where the focus on AI, the entire chapter was literally just an interview with ChatGPT. So they just asked the question and had ChatGPT give the answer. And it was amazing how actually instructive it was. In fact, I just had the thought that since we're missing two panelists, we probably should have put ChatGPT just up on the screen and just had the third panelist be just AI. That actually would have been kind of cool. And there's just some real recent things that have happened, not so much from a planning perspective, but it does impact infrastructure and what we put out there in our communities and the way of especially cameras and all that. There was just an article recently about CTA, which again, if you're not here from Chicago, is the Chicago Transit Authority, and integrating AI and cameras to assess the presence of weapons, et cetera, on CTA to be able to analyze what's in the car and how response might be necessary for that. And if you're an Apple geek, just yesterday, the release of the new iPhones are now all geared towards Apple Intelligence. So in fact, most of the thrust of the thing yesterday was on that. Which is sort of a electronic infrastructure piece. So anyway, all these tools that we know we use, and that ChatGPT is just one example of the large language learning aspect of how we do this into our reports. And we haven't had any kind of policy or don't do this on staff, but I know a lot of folks do, which is to try to make things less tedious. And I don't know if you know this, I'm kind of geeky this way, I like this aspect, but the word robot comes from a Czech word that actually means tedious work or drudgery work, and that's how we got to use the word robot in these phrases, and that's the idea. So I know police officers, for example, have been very thankful for their for the integration of AI and things like ChatGPT to be able to take the report writing that I think they dread. I've heard that they spend about half their time writing follow-up police reports on incidents, but to be able to take the incidents that happened and let AI essentially draft the report has been a time saver for them. There's a lot we could talk about. I should probably pass it back to Kisak so I don't go on too long here. But just to say that there, and I think it's important to keep coming back to this element, is as much as attractive as these tools are, there is a human component that is absolutely essential. And there's a danger, I think, and I think we'll come back to this later in the conversation, but there's a danger of putting too much stock in a tool where we actually abdicate our role as humans to be able to make sure that it's correct, accurate, reflects reality. In the case of those police officers, they still have to go back and make sure that it reflects what actually happened in their perception. It's not a press a button and send it off. That has huge legal and ethical implications.
Absolutely, Ty. So we do definitely want to come back to the conversation around ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is not the only AI that we need to be considerate of, and also ethics issues that's associated with the ChatGPT component there too. But before we touch on the ethics or the problems that AI may have, can we actually talk a little bit more about your current sort of recent successes of implementing AI ML? If you could just sort of reference a project that you may have worked on where audience can sort of hear and feel where the true implications of the use of AI and ML for our practices?
Sure. So, well, I'll go back to I'm running through all of the projects in my head. What's a good example? But I do want to probably revisit asset management, and I see that that's probably the biggest shift change that I'm seeing right now in a way for helping our clients plan their budgets and do capital planning efforts, really around taking those key variables that are collected in the field and using those to predict the future of that asset. And so talking about that data science component a little bit and the success stories around it, we recently finished an assessment for Northwestern College campus up in New York. And so they utilized this kind of predictive analytics model to help them plan for future budgeting into the future. So typically, you would go out, you'd inspect all your assets, and you'd say, here's all your deficiencies, here's all the stuff you have to do right now. It's going to cost you $1 billion. And then you hand them that piece of paper and you leave. What we really try to do is help them in prioritizing where to spend their money and when to spend the money and when it's appropriate. A lot of times when we tell them it's going to cost $1 billion, they don't have that in the budget. So there's really a give and take aspect of that, of helping them plan those things. And I think that using machine learning really assists us in making the right recommendations to that client. So based on all of the history of all of the assets that we've inspected, when we look at a boiler, we know that those key indicators of temperature and age and current condition and all those things are key indicators of the current state of that asset. And then if we look at how those key indicators change over time, we can start to build that deterioration curve for that asset and plot exactly where it is in its life cycle. So we're not only looking at immediate needs, we're looking at what need is that asset going to have in the future. And that'll tell us that 5 years down the road, 10 years, 20 years down the road, they need to budget something for that asset. And if we do that across their entire portfolio, you really start to get an understanding of, here's my budget in 2025, and here's what I need in 2026. Here's what I need in 2045. And I see a giant spike there because all of my assets are going to be end of life at the same time because my building was built in 1920 and that's how long the assets last. And I need to be aware and start planning now for that huge budget spike that's coming up. And that's just one aspect of how we can utilize like predictive analytics to really understand the risk of not understanding the current state of my assets and what's upcoming to keep my building in proper shape. But yeah, key win, Northeastern University. There you go.
That's good. Thank you. Ty, if you...
Sure. And then this is Rajiv. So he made it. Congratulations.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
So let me answer a question, then maybe give him a chance to introduce himself. So Brian, who was our other panelist that could not be here from the city of Aurora, I know some of the things, it might be helpful since his name is on this program to talk about some of the things that they're doing successfully. I know he's talked about the integration of analyzing water use throughout the city of Aurora, which, if you're not from here, is a west, kind of almost far west suburb. Shouldn't say suburb, it's like the second largest city in Illinois. But anyway, this is the bad mic. Working? So I don't know if there's something, I'm trying to hold it still and see what happens. So he's working on analyzing those kind of things. He's also used AI for the visual recognition through sewer lines. If you're familiar with this, of sending the cameras down through the sewer lines, but now with the onslaught of AI, there's a lot more assessment that can take place, which they've used successfully to be able to identify problems and target their infrastructure investments. So he's doing a lot with that as well. At NERPC, we haven't run into this yet, but I know we've had a big discussion on this topic with, we're very active in the National Association of Regional Councils, regional organizations like NERPC nationwide. And we've had some I know AI is much more than Chat GPT, so sorry to come back to that, but this whole large language model issue, it's just something that I think a lot of agencies like mine that were starting to do a lot more in this field had a real cautionary sort of stop sign put up by some legal folks that came and presented to us about the danger of surpassing copyright laws through the use of things like Chat GPT. If you know the way the large language model works, basically anything that it's scraping off of the internet may or may not be copyrighted information. So as we generate our own reports, I used to say, and I guess I still say, that there's no such thing as plagiarism in government. I think that's largely true because we're publicly funded with public dollars to produce the reports that we report. But if you're essentially stealing information that you've gained from a Chat GPT or some other, large language model to be able to integrate into your reports, there's the possibility that if you are not using that as the basis of something to use your own creative thought processes to actually create, there's a good chance you may be stealing information that actually wasn't supposed to be public, or you don't have the rights to use. So there's a lot of cautions out there. This is Rajiv. Big hand for Rajiv for having made it on Uber.
Sorry, guys. Definitely
stressful.
Tuesday. Car broke down, then some traffic. Finally got an Uber, and then here. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So Raj, if you could introduce yourself, your role, and what we were just talking about is the current sort of a recent success implementing AI ML. I thought your example when we were on the discussions, I thought your example with the city of Chicago implementing the
Absolutely.
weather data was really great example.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
could talk about them.
Sure, yeah. So I work at Argonne National Laboratory in the suburbs in Lemont, right here, 15 miles from here. I've been there since 2009. And so I've a couple of masters, so I don't have a PhD. So that puts me in a good spot to kind of move between projects, between domains. So for the first 5 years, I did reactors. Then I worked on urban simulations. Now I work on two projects. One is large-scale climate simulations and cancer deep learning models. So like using AI ML to discover new drugs for cancer. So we have data from NIH and we apply AI and ML to those data sets and then try to see how our models are performing. So we are now in the process of taking a lot of community models and then analyzing them and kind of standardizing the whole process of how you discover new data in cancer. And the other one is completely different, which is doing climate simulations. So those are the two projects that I work on. And in the past, I've worked on two different projects. If you guys are familiar with Array of Things project or some white thingies on traffic poles in city of Chicago. We had 500 of those installed. Any of you? Raise your hands if you have seen those, like AOT sensors. Couple, yeah. Yeah, so Charlie led that project, Charlie Catlett. I was a part of it for the time being. So what that was, we got permission from the city of Chicago to install 500 of these sensor boxes. They would measure like, I think around 60 different things. And they would have like a small chip, 5G chip, and that would kind of emit all that data to the cloud. And then we would analyze them later. And so the idea was we only measure pressure, temperature only from like 3-4 weather stations or so, right? Now we want to do it much more local. Like, okay, what's it in that sub-district or in that set of buildings versus what is it like, let's say in Evanston or say IIT. So I took some data out from that and then tried to see, okay, can I actually see urban heat island effect? Urban heat island effect is just saying that right around the concrete jungle of buildings, there's a little higher temperature compared to what it is out in the burbs. So given that we have lake effect and everything, I picked up a few days and I could easily see that, yeah, there's like a good 4 or 5 degree lower temperature, right, around as we go further and so on. And so we kind of saw that that some data like that or much finer grained data can do a lot of wonders. So on a similar note, there was another project. I've been a part of the Exascale project. So Exascale is like the compute project that just ended in the Department of Energy landscape of things. And now we're kind of moving towards a new frontier of whatever is next after Exascale. So we have Exascale computers here like Aurora or other supercomputers that you would think. So the common theme that has tied all my work at Argonne has been the supercomputers, so running things at large scale with a lot of processors. Like you'd have 100,000 plus processors and you would run things on those big machines to try to solve some or the other scientific problem. So those exascale machines, we were trying to pitch a problem to DOE saying that we are going to try to couple urban systems, and we formed a group of around 5 national labs. One was doing agent-based models. So say, 8 o'clock, everybody's here downtown. By 5, it's empty. So that's how the road transportation is going to go on. So those are like the agent-based models. Then you have your weather data, which we are always constantly measuring from satellites. And then you would have data for the measurement of temperature and so on. And then the building energy models, like this room has 40 different lights. And from 8 to 5, you are spending this much energy in the building, and that is the exhaust coming out of the building. So you take in all that data, and then you have the transportation models. And so you take in all that data and you try to create a coupled model out of all that. They're all different time scales, so it was all a challenge. So we kind of applied all that. And the part that I worked with was saying that I'm going to couple the building energy models. They typically used data from like, okay, this year August looks like 1998 August. So we're going to take data from 98 August and then do the prediction. That's how they typically work. So we were like, okay, now we have much finer grained data and we have the live satellite data. We can use some AI models to kind of make a little bit further pitch and then see how that compares to those old models. So I kind of did that study, published a paper of that. And that project is still in works by some other folks. I'm not involved in that project anymore, but yeah.
Thank you, Rajiv. Based on what I'm hearing, I'm hearing some of those common themes here. We're hearing a lot about predictiveness, simulations, and sort of depending on AI to get reports generated, so auto generations of reports. So general question, the current trends that we're seeing, one of the current trends we're seeing in the infrastructure side is we're seeing a lot of technologies and startup companies coming up with reality capture on the roadways, infrastructures, bridges, right? And we're also seeing a lot of companies coming back with simulations on this, utilizing the assets we're collecting. What are your sort of feedback on some of those technology companies as they come up and trying to provide you with services, different outputs, results? Like, can you talk a little bit more about that specifically, if you have any experiences related to those?
So you're referring to companies that would generate like digital twin models and things like that. Sure.
I try to retain from saying the digital twin word, but yes, please.
Okay. So so there's a lot of companies popping up in the marketplace, and I know that we vet many of them as we go along, since they do really provide useful information and useful services. But one of the things that we really like to utilize is producing those LiDAR scans or digital twins within the work that we do. So if we're doing like a bridge inspection, we might scan that bridge once and then utilize AI to monitor or check all of those scans for cracks in the bridges or stains or any other structural issues that can be identified throughout that scan, that not that a human wouldn't be able to identify that looking at it, but there's such a wide area that human has to walk and then get out their tape measure and measure things, and maybe they forgot something that they saw in the field and they forgot to write it down. You can always refer back to those scans and digital twins and really zoom in onto certain areas, and the granularity is really high as well. But it's really that partnership between having that human element and those experts in the field that know exactly what they need to do, but then enhancing their capabilities with additional technology, which this is, so that back in the office, they can go back and refer to that scan, which is a really lifelike representation of what they saw in the field, without having to go back in the field and maybe shut that bridge down again and cause extra delays. So that really is something that we utilize as much as possible. But it's there are a lot of players in that space that are getting into it and are very new. So one thing that we do at STV is really vet all of those companies to see which ones are really doing what we want and what we want to partner with. Yeah.
I think in the planning world, there's a local Chicago area planning consulting firm that has done a lot with integrating sort of the video game space. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier about use of AI in public engagement. So they have basically project proposals or entire neighborhoods or entire reconstructed downtowns create. I don't know that they go so far as to call it a digital twin per se. That's pretty precise, but at least to be able to function in that environment using the same kind of video game controllers that you might use in an immersive video game, so you can explore the entire, height, depth, width, almost simulate the experience of being within that environment before actually approving the plans or understanding that. And I think they've had huge success with that. What I might add as a comment also is just to come back to what I mentioned at the start about just this video that just Tesla had just released of comparing street environments and autonomous driving versus human reaction times, is that I think it's instructive about that, because and this is where I think the machine learning aspect is most effective in a machine environment. So, and humans are much more complicated than that. So as much as the technology goes in the way of like full self-driving capability to be able to identify the unpredictable, it's really only successful because it's in an environment that and I'm getting a little bit esoteric here, but that we've really engineered over the last 50 years to be very machine-like in our driving environment. There's set rules, there's stop signs, there's things that the machine learns to recognize and be prepared for. That would not work as well down in the middle of a village from an earlier time where things are a lot more chaotic because humans are a lot more chaotic. So I just think that's cautionary, that it works really well when machines are in a machine environment. They do one thing really, really well, but to put them in another environment is an entirely different process.
Yeah, I don't have some direct experience with data from the bridges or per se, but what I think is, given working with all these type of systems, data is gold, and whatever data you have, you want to organize it nicely so that it's trainable. It's sort of, quote unquote, AI ready. So you want to have in your organization the data to be AI ready. And Yeah, sort of machine learning, AI, they're all kind of used here. I don't know if it has been clarified, but I'll give a quick, maybe 30 seconds thing that AI is like the super big umbrella, right? Under it, we have had traditional methods like, okay, how do I make this process better? And there's one engineering which is sort of deterministic, like, how do I organize and do this thing? So that's like one arm of artificial intelligence. The other arm of AI is like machine learning, right? And that's under the machine learning umbrella is deep learning. And the success of deep learning is all image recognition and let's say our agent-based models and so on. And these models have become popular mostly because you throw them a lot of data at them and then ask them questions, and you would be surprised at what all they find with that data. It's not that you ask and train them for a particular problem, but you throw a lot of things. So it's all neural networks, so to say. But yeah, sorry.
So Rajiv, I do have a question specifically on infrastructure side with your background. How important do you think the sensor devices are becoming? Because we all recognize this, a lot of sensors are being implemented on our roadway designs as well as our infrastructure designs. Like from your background, technical background expertise, can you explain a little bit more about the value of the data that these sensors are collecting in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the whole edge computing has been coming up just because of the sensors, and the amount of benefits that we've seen with these sensors is amazing. And the upfront cost to set these up and so for what they produce is amazing. But there's a lot of cleaning of that data and to see that you remove anomalies, because sometimes some things would come up and report like a temperature of 200 degrees, like out of 40 sensors that are in there. That's why they have so many of them. Some of them would report bad stuff, and sometimes that reporting is a little bit like there's a latency gap in there, and you don't want that. So there's a lot of compute power and stuff that is coming around it, but there's definitely big benefits because those sensors are very, very cheap. The way to set them, and even the AI, since since the entire industry is sort of moving and there's a wave, I think it's a very good thing that we have a wave, and like so many companies are all of a sudden talking about AI and trying to implement AI. That way, the barrier to entry and the upfront cost for anybody to sort of implement it is much lower. It's I would not say it's a hype, but I think it's something that is really producing great results, and where we would see a lot of changes and a lot of good things coming out of it. Just like bridge failures, the example that you gave. I think we would be able to predict it and we would be able to fix it beforehand.
Yep. So obviously the cost of implementing some of the solutions are becoming lower, and it's easier for us to adapt. And more than we realize, the AI ML components are really embedded into our practices on the day-to-day. So Ty, I want to go back to that initial questions that we've been discussing, ethics, and sort of, it's a twofold questions. Ethics of how should we approach AI ML, and the second part is legal implications if you had any experiences around it. And this question goes to all the panels, but Ty, if you could start with that question.
Yeah, let me start with just the legal aspect to follow up on what I was saying earlier about the copyright issues and all that, because I think that affects a lot of folks in this room that are in the consulting world in particular. The legal counsel that we had with this national group was advising. Thank you. I think if we hold it still, it might work. I don't know. He's shaking his head back there. Okay, thank you. So if lost my train of thought. So if they're advising us to put in our contracts, literally as we hire consultants, that they will not use AI in the production of their reports. And I don't know the degree in this room of which you're already using that. I'm not saying that's good advice. That's up to your own legal counsel to negotiate with your own contracts. But I'm just saying that's out there, that this is enough of a concern for some public entities that they're being advised to literally require you to say that you are not going to use large language model type things in the construction of what you give back to the public entity. So I think that's something to be aware of from the legal perspective. From an ethical perspective, I just, if you'll bear with me just for a minute, I'm actually going to harken back to my undergraduate degree in philosophy for a second. So Plato wrote with a dialogue, one of his dialogues with Socrates, about a situation where a Greek king gets somebody coming to them with the invention of writing to be able to write down the Greek language. And according to Plato in this dialogue with Socrates, Socrates says, that's great, but recognize that the more you depend on this written language, the less you're going to be able to rely on hearing and oral memory, and you're going to become more dependent on that written language. So there's a cost to that. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Like I can almost guarantee you will not remember like things that were said on this panel that you may be listening to right now. Ken's going to be making the videos available that you can go back and watch it. But, understand in an earlier society when they did not have the kind of things that we have now, you would have had a much easier time retaining what you were actually hearing in terms of the dialogue. There was a lot more oral memory going on. So I'm not saying this is not a judgment about whether these things are necessarily bad. It's just the recognition. And I think this is underpinning a lot of ethical concerns with this technology, that there is something you give up every time you move to another technology. In that respect, it's not neutral. You are actually retraining yourself to use a certain tool. It's not just this new thing comes in my life and I just use the tool. Your brain is actually rewiring itself to use that tool. So even with the devices that we have, you did not know anything about pinching, tapping, zooming, that sort of thing. You trained yourself to use these devices where now it's second nature. And I think as we see some benefits of AI and moving into that, that's an important recognition to make. It's one thing to go from, hey, now you can do this and you'll no longer have to do this. But then the rest of that equation is, now you will have to learn to do this. And in some cases, you will no longer be able to do this. So it's a little bit more complicated than just great tool. There's a human component here that we have to consider with the influx of these technologies. I'll stop, but that's important too. We had a word techne, which is Greek for just practical arts, practical things. The word technology was essentially created because we didn't have any words to talk about the rapid explosion of the use of more tools that came into our life. That's technically, this technology is the study of practical arts. That's really what that word means. Now it becomes something that's just sort of our high-tech electronic gizmos and that sort of thing. But there's a little deeper thing that I think we have to be a bit more reflective about as we take advantage of what these tools can offer.
I saw a funny story about a guy that wrote a song, and so we have chat generators with ChatGPT, and then you use Dolly to create images. Well, now you can create songs. So you put in like the song lyrics, it'll generate the song, and you can put in country or jazz or whatever. And so this guy wrote songs. He put them up on Spotify, and then he built bots to listen to his songs on Spotify. And he made like $10 million just generating songs through ChatGPT and then building AI bots to listen to his own songs to generate that revenue. Now, it's all illegal, but I was like, that's using your brain to use AI, but so don't do that. But going back to the ethical question there, it's you can certainly use it for things unethically, and it's important to understand kind of the ramifications of what you're doing. And so it's important using ChatGPT. It's important to know that they can utilize the data that you're putting in there to run their models and train their models. So you don't want to put in protected information from your company. And so it's really good to have that security and data governance team that's monitoring what you're doing within those tools and parameters. But we've been fortunate enough to be blessed with the ability to utilize those tools, and are running short on time. So
yeah, absolutely. Like, cell phone, like, Ty, you were giving the example, it has eaten up a lot of things, telephones, this, that, everything. AI is also going to eat up a lot of things in a similar fashion. Coming to ethics and like your own data and protecting your data and applying AI, the community has been working on federated learning so that you have your own data, but they will bring AI to you to kind of train on your data, but only take specific aspects of it. And several other things like federated learning, where the privacy of your data and the components in the data that you don't want to expose, they're not exposed, and you can still train the data. So that ethics component is sort of still maintained, and the privacy is maintained, and you can still do the AI on top of the data that you have. But yeah, I think it ought to be applied to a lot of things, because the benefits far outweigh the challenges and the things that we give up. Similar to what cell phones brought us, I think it's going to be a bigger revolution than that.
Yep. We could probably talk a lot more about AI ML, but because our time is up, thank you for the panels for your time and your discussions today. I think we could wrap it up here. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.